our next speaker, Sarah Boazman, which is going to present also some work she's been doing. Sarah, are you around? Excellent. Excellent. Then it's all yours. You can go ahead.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sebastian. So today my presentation has actually changed a little bit. I'm going to be talking to you about identification and analysis of areas of interest and potential safe landing sites for Prospect. So you heard from Dave earlier on about Prospect, but just as a brief reminder, Prospect is one of the instruments that will be on the NASA CLPS 10th mission, and Prospect has a drill known as Proceed that will sample the surface of up to 1 meters in depth. These samples will then be examined by the onboard laboratory POSPAR. And the key focus of Prospect is designed to measure volatiles and sample water ice from these samples from within the lunar surface, and therefore we want to identify a landing site that will be volatile rich. So today I'm going to be presenting part of the initial part of the study that's ongoing, and I will give a broad overview of the South Polar region from 75 degrees to 90 degrees south. And this is work in preparation for landing site selection for the NASA CLPS 10th mission. So I'll talk about briefly the elevation and topography of the South Polar region. I'll also touch on the slopes and where it might be accessible by a future mission. And I'll also touch on the illumination conditions at the South Pole. So as I mentioned, Prospect has a particular focus on finding areas that may contain volatiles and water ice. And so I'll be talking to you today a little bit about some of the Diviner data sets, which show locations that have a thermal environment consistent for water ice to be stable. And we'll also be looking at the M-cubed data set and showing where surface ice might exist. And as I mentioned, this is an ongoing study, so in the future we'll also be looking at the mineralogy of the South Polar region using the Kikuyu dataset, and then later we'll also add in the constraints of the 10th NASA CLPS mission, including things such as the slope, elevation, and the landing site area or the ellipse of the landing site, and also illumination and visibility. And then areas of interest or areas that we want to investigate further, we'll look at these in much more detail with higher resolution data sets such as NAC images. So just to give a broad overview of the region, so this here on the right hand side is a WAC mosaic, and it shows the area from 75 degrees to 90 degrees south, and the orange star shows the location of the South Pole, and then the grid lines going outwards to 75 degrees. And here the focus is looking for where volatiles and water ice might be present. So next I have an elevation map of the LOLA 30 meters per pixel dataset overlaid on a hillshade, and hopefully what you can see from this is that the topography around the South Pole is very varied. So you see in dark blue and light blue areas of low elevation, and these are typically crater floors or basins. And then areas in yellow, orange and red have higher elevation, and these typically are crater walls, crater rims and topographic ridges. So then here I've created a slope map derived from the LOLA 30 meter per pixel dataset, and in this image I've included just slopes less than 10 degrees, so areas that would be accessible by a future mission. So the areas where you can see the hillshade, so this is a slope map overlaid on hillshade, and the hillshade can be seen in grey. And these areas where the hillshade can be seen show slopes greater than 10 degrees. And hopefully what you can see is the areas of low elevation, these crater floors and basins shown in the light blue colours, also have low slopes, so nice flat areas. And then areas that are slightly steeper, seen in the yellow, orange and purples. These are areas that are typically crater walls and ridges that are slightly steeper to land on. Then taking it a step further, looking at slopes of less than 5 degrees, I've used the same colour scale as the previous image. You can see that these crater floors are nice and flat and are accessible by a future mission. And there's also these nice flat plateaus in between craters that also might be accessible by a future mission. So as I mentioned, Prospect is looking for an area that is volatile and water ice rich. And so one of the ways we can investigate where this water ice might be is by looking at the temperatures of the surface. And I've done this by using the seasonal diviner average temperatures. And this image is the winter data set. And you can see in orange and brown the lower temperatures, so temperatures around 50 degrees Kelvin, and then in purple temperatures of up to 100 degrees Kelvin. And these temperatures would be conditions that would be stable for water ice to exist if it was to be present. And so hopefully what you can see from this image is that there are areas across the region where there are thermal conditions consistent for water ice to exist if present. I'm now looking at the summer data set. So again, areas in orange and sort of brown colours show the lower temperatures of up to 50 degrees Kelvin, and then areas in purple, the 100 degrees Kelvin. And hopefully what you notice is that there's a slight difference in the distribution of this temperature data from the winter and summer data set. So now looking at where ice exposures exist at the surface, the image on the left-hand side of the slide shows the M³ data set, which was from Lee et al. In 2018, and this shows where ice exposures are present at the surface. And as you can see, there's a wide distribution across the South Polar region. And then the right-hand image just shows those ice exposures where they are correlated with slopes of less than 10 degrees. So these would be ice exposures that might be accessible by a future mission. And then taking it a step further, I also looked at where those ice exposures correlated with slopes of less than 10 degrees, and also where the seasonal diviner data showed temperatures of 50 to 100 degrees Kelvin. And so on the left-hand image, you can see where the data points correlate with slopes of less than 10 degrees, and the seasonal winter diviner data, where the temperatures are between 50 to 100 degrees Kelvin. And then the right-hand image is the ice exposures that correlate with slopes of less than 10 degrees, and where seasonal summer diviner data shows temperatures of 50 to 100 degrees Kelvin. And hopefully what you can see is that there's differences in the distribution of those data points, but these are areas that might be accessible by a future mission. And then I also looked at exposures that exist that correlate with slopes of less than 5 degrees, and where the seasonal diviner data also aligns and shows temperatures of 50 to 100 degrees Kelvin. So again, the left-hand image shows the winter seasonal diviner data, and then the right-hand image shows the summer diviner data. And so then what I wanted to do then is to look at how these data points match up with, or how they're distributed in relation to the illumination conditions at the South Pole. So on the left-hand image here, there is the illumination map from Mazarico et al. 2011. And what you can see is that the areas illuminated around the South Pole, so around Shackleton Crater, and then you also get these areas in shadow, so showing this kind of black-grey colours, also known as permanently shadowed regions. And then the right-hand image, you can see the data points from the previous slides and how they relate to the illumination conditions. And what you can see is that most of the data points occur in those shadowed regions. However, there are some data points that occur in kind of semi-illuminated regions, or partially illuminated, or areas that are in shadow but are neighboured by areas that are illuminated. So just to point out a few of those areas that might be of potential interest for Prospect, and I've circled these in orange and labelled them A and B. So on the left-hand image, it just shows those areas highlighted on the illumination map. And then on the right-hand side is the NAC mosaic of 1 metre per pixel, and then those areas of interest highlighted. And this is just to show what the surface looks like at those locations. Just in a bit more detail, panel A on the left and panel B on the right, and they were those points from the previous slide. So in A, you can see that there's 2 data points occur in these kind of partially illuminated, semi-illuminated regions, so they may be of interest for sampling. And then in panel B, most of the data points occur in these kind of shadowed regions, or just on the border of a shadowed to illuminated region. So these still might be of interest for a future mission. So as I mentioned, this is just an initial study, and this is work that's ongoing, but we started to kind of give a broad overview of the South Polar region. And we've identified areas that might be accessible by a future mission, and identified areas that potentially could contain volatiles. And this will continue to, we'll continue the study, and we'll investigate in more detail the areas of interest where we've identified where there may be volatiles and water ice present. We'll also add in additional data sets, so looking in higher resolution using those NAC images, also looking at the mineralogy using Kikuyu data. We'll add in the Oxford thermal model and also an illumination model of 75 to 90 degrees south. And then any areas of interest that are accessible, we'll then take it a step further by looking at doing some geological mapping and also mapping of surface features in those areas that are accessible, particularly looking for boulders and craters that may present a hazard to landing a future mission. And we'll also calculate any of the statistics of those number of features in those areas. And I'll leave it there and take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. You're well on time. Mahesh is first. Is it true that data for summer season seems to indicate that there are more areas at lunar south polar regions where water ice is stable at the surface?
From that Diviner data set, it seems to appear that way. It's something that I want to compare to the Oxford thermal model, just to kind of compare and double check that that's what the data is showing, and see how, if there's any differences in that, and maybe look into a bit more why it is that the summer there seems to be more conditions consistent with water ice being stable.
Great. You also had on, I think it was the slide 14, either I didn't find the two colors, but it looks like you only had one of the two, summer or winter, that was actually favorable with the M-cube location. Can you expand a bit on that?
Of course, yeah. So a lot of the data points actually overlap each other. So areas where you could only just see the blue, it was because the other data point is in the exact same place. So that's why it was a bit harder.
Okay, so but then what's the distribution? Is that equal, or is there a balance between one of the seasons?
So there's some of the summer data points are different to the winter data sets, but on a whole, most of the data points align. I'm not sure if that answers your question. But
yeah, I think it does. That's pretty good. Any other questions from the audience? I'll ask you another quick one. How does now your analysis feed into what we've seen before from Sheila, where you're providing different inputs? Are you planning to just merge the two, your inputs, so that she also see the probability of landing?
So we're kind of working in collaboration with each other. So me and Sheila have a lot of discussions regularly, and the work that Elliot presented from Sheila was kind of looking more generally, whereas I will actually be more focused on the NASA Eclipse 10th mission and directly looking for when we get constraints in from the NASA Eclipse landing site selection, be able to make sure that we focus it directly for that mission as opposed to a more general overview. But we'll be both working kind of together with each other to share and then best share those data sets with each other.
Great, excellent. If there are no more questions, we'll slowly transition. That was a great 45 minutes. I'm going to take a rest and give it now to Jessica, that will share the last part of that session this morning.